Hello, in this video I just wanted to do a little bit of a chat about cues. Somebody in the comments section just wanted to ask me about the cue that I'm using, and I'm no cue expert and I'm not a cue addict, so I don't go out buying all these expensive cues, these handmade cues. I don't really understand why not, but it's just something I've just not been interested in, to be honest. And I've always been able to get on with reasonably cheap cues anyway, so I think it's more of a personal preference thing than an out of necessity, personally. But each to their own, and maybe there are benefits to having one of the handmade cues that cost hundreds of pounds, but I'm not really aware of that, so I just wanted to do a quick chat about the cues and just what I've got. So this cue that I've got here is just a standard Riley stock cue. It's maple. It's got a machine spliced butt, so it hasn't got like the traditional handmade chevrons that the handmade cues have got. So it's a machine spliced cue. It's not very light. It's probably about 16 ounces, so it's very light. Cues can go up to, I believe, 20 something ounces. I'm not quite sure because, like I say, I'm no expert. With it being so light, it doesn't seem to be that much of a limitation in terms of playing the shots. I'm still able to play the shots. So, and the cue length is 56 inches or 56.5 inches, and it just tends to be the height of my shoulder. That's the type of cue length that I prefer and that I've gone for over the years. I just think I've had longer cues in the past and they've always been a bit uncomfortable to play with, and I don't always feel entirely comfortable with them, so I always try and get a shorter cue, which seems to suit me the most. I've got a 10mm ferrule on there with a 10mm tip, and the tip is a Monstar tip. It's the medium, which is green. It's a really good tip. I've had this on for a couple of years now. I know that some people are changing out master tips like every month or so, or every couple of months. But this tip doesn't seem to lose any shape. I mean, once you fit it and once you've shaped it, then that's it. It just seems to last forever. It doesn't mushroom over, or not as much as would be a concern. And in terms of how straight the cue is, it's not very straight at all. So that's probably the only con to having this cue, is it's not very straight, and you would need a straight cue really. Ideally, then what you're looking for is a straight cue. But again, having said that, it doesn't seem to hinder me very much because I'm still able to play the shots, and I think that, fortunately, where the warp isn't how I hold the cue. It's in a reasonable position, so it's kind of on the downward slope rather than going across any direction or going up. It's sort of kind of on the downward slope, so it's not too bad. The reason why it's a maple is just down to aesthetics, really, I suppose. I just prefer maple over ash because it's a lot cleaner, and for some reason I prefer that when I'm down on the shot. It just brightens the shot up somehow. I don't know if it's because I'm blind or what, but it just brightens the shot. I just think this wood's a lot nicer to look at than ash. But again, that's just down to personal preference. That's just something I prefer to do. So that's the cue. The butt diameter is probably standard butt diameter, which is about 28mm, I believe, something around that area. So, but yeah, I mean, with regards to cues, I think it's just down to personal preference more than anything. I mean, the only main things you need to be decisive on is the length and the weight and the tip size. I think everything else is just preferential, you know, it's just what you choose. I mean, you can have You could have different types of butt, different types of woods, different veneers, and just aesthetical things to make the cue look nicer. But it doesn't help you play any better. I mean, having a cheap cue is just as good as having an expensive cue. I mean, it's just a case of down to personal preference. There's not really a lot more I could say about them because, like I say, I'm no expert, and this is just my personal view on cues. What I will say though is that a cue really is only as good as the tip that's been fitted, because if you've got a bad tip on the cue that's too hard or too soft, then it doesn't matter how good the cue is, because the cue won't perform if it hasn't got a good tip on it. It'll underperform, which would then kind of devalue the cue. So that's the main point, I think, and that's the point that I like to put across, is because that's the reason why I use these cheap cues. I mean, I've made quite a lot of big breaks with this cue. I've had it for quite some time now, and even the cues I've owned previously to this, I've had big breaks with. So it's never a case of cheap is bad, because cheap isn't bad, because they all have the same attributes. You know, it's just a case of whether they work for you or not, I suppose. But yeah, that's all I can really say about the cues and things, because like I say, I'm not an expert. It's just what I prefer to use. So for me, it's a maple and it's a one piece. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention about the different sections as well. You can get the one piece cue, which is like this one. You can get a cue that's a two piece, which is split in the middle. You can get a 3/4 cue, which has got the joint somewhere around here. So you can have it in a smaller case. I mean, I use one of the cue tubes and store mine at the club, so I don't have to carry it around with me. I just leave it at the club that I play at, and that's that basically. So, but yeah, and the other advantage of it being a one-piece cue is the fact that nothing can go wrong with the joints, because over time I have seen before where the glue joints have, you know, corroded or rotted away, and the joints have gone, so they've had to have the cue sent off again to have new joints fitted. And like I say, you're never going to have that kind of a problem with these kind of cues, because it's just a one-piece cue, and the contact's always going to be a consistent contact every time. So that's another reason why I chose this cue over another one. Yeah, there's not really much more I can say about them really. It's just a case of pick a cue up. Don't be too concerned about the cost, whether you want to spend money on one or you don't want to spend money on one. Don't let that put you off. Just pick a cue up, try it, and if you like it and you've got a decent enough tip on it, then you should be good to go really. It's just it's as simple as that. Yeah, what else could I could mention about how to look after the cues as well. I mean, that's important, because you don't want the cue to be, neglected, or not neglected, but you need to know how to look after the cue once you've got it. Whenever I have a cue, what I always tend to do is strip all the varnish off with a really high, a high grade paper, say an 80 to 120 grit sandpaper, get all the grain off, then move up a couple of grades to, say, I don't know, 200, 300 grade to get the finer grain, get the finer grain down. And then I move on to the wet and dry, about 600 grit, to really get down into the wood. And then once I've really gotten down into the wood, I use the ultra fine wet and dry paper, which is, say, 2,500 grit. No, sorry, 2,000 grit, then 2,500 grit, and then I move on to the 3,000, which turns the wood into really smooth playing wood. I mean, it even leaves a slight sheen on the cue, which is really, really nice. And the ferrules, I use the 3,000 grit on the ferrule as well to clean it up. And when you do get a dirty ferrule, Don't be tempted to use any kind of wire wool or anything like that, because you will start to strip the ferrule down and it'll lose diameter over time. If you use once you've used your 3000 grit and you've got the sheen on the ferrule, I would never use that again. All you need to do is to either cut a little piece of leather strip, or get part of a beer mat and tear the end off and just wrap that around the ferrule, and then just burnish the ferrule and the tip at the same time, and it'll push the tip into the ferrule and it'll also clean the ferrule at the same time, so it'll just look a lot nicer and be a lot cleaner. And the cues will get sticky over time as well with humidity and things. So what I tend to do is I'll get a beer towel, wet it out, and then wring it as dry as possible, and then I'll just squeaky it all the way down the cue so it squeaks slightly, just really quick, and then immediately get the dry part of the cloth. So wet one half and keep the other half dry, and then I'll squeak dry the wood all the way down, and then you'll find that your cue has got a much better feel to it afterwards, and it won't be as sticky. When I've sanded the cue down, what I always tend to do as well is I use linseed oil and give it a fine coat of linseed oil, let it dry overnight, and then seal it with beeswax. And that seems to do a really good job of keeping the moisture out. And you don't have to wipe them down quite as often then, you see, because that is a good thing to do, because it keeps it cleaner and it's a lot smoother on your bridge hand as well, which helps a lot. So anyway, that's all I can really say about the cues. Like I say, I'm not an expert. I'm not a cue addict. I've never been a cue addict. And yeah, I just thought I'd share my views about the cues and what I think about them. And to be quite honest, it's not a lot. But anyway, that's my cue. That's the one I use. I'm quite happy with it. I mean, the value of it is probably less than £10, but to me, I mean, the value I have for it is a lot more than £10, because that's a lot more that it offers me, and I'm quite happy with it, to be honest. So anyway, for the person that requested this video, I hope this was good enough information, and I hope this helps you to decide what you want to do when you go out and purchase a cue, because like I said, don't be too concerned about the value of it. It's the value it's going to give you. That's the main thing. That's the main objective, how much value it gives you. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. I hope you stick around for the next video, and if you do like the videos that you're seeing on my YouTube channel, please subscribe and you'll see much more content such as this. Thank you very much. Thanks for watching again. Bye.